everyone, it's Seth Rudetsky back here. Sometimes he'll praise you, sometimes he'll needle, but he loves Broadway. Michael Riedel.
Thank you. At least you pronounce my name right. They usually say Riedel, and I always say it rhymes with needle, because that's what I do. I needle the Broadway establishment.
That's what you're good for. Hey, listen, I want to just say this. Michael has this new book out, which we're going to be discussing in depth. I first saw it, I was on the Playbill cruise in Asia, and every single Jewish person over 60 was carrying it. I was like, what the hell is that? Like, it's wonderful. Anyway, I just got it. It's called Razzle Dazzle, and it really is great. It's not fiction. It's nonfiction, all about what I'm only halfway through, but about basically the Shubert Empire and how Broadway was almost destroyed and built up again. And it's so well researched, but so readable. It's like a Jackie Collins novel. I mean,
that's high praise indeed, because to drop a name, Clump, Jackie Collins was indeed a friend of mine. And as I was working on the book, I visited her in Beverly Hills. And I said, Jackie, can you give me some advice? Because I'm in the middle of my first book, and you've written 80 million, and they've sold 80, 100,000 gazillion copies. And she said, think of it as a novel, and end every chapter with a cliffhanger. Because she said, you want the reader to move right along to the next chapter.
100%, and I just noticed that as I was reading it, because one of them was like, about that one guy meeting the two lawyers, and it was like, it was a relationship they would soon regret. I was like, what's going to happen? I mean, literally, I thought that. I was like, oh my God, that's such good writing. It really is fun, because basically every single person in the book is either an alcoholic or a rapist. Like, you cannot believe.
Drug addicts, of course.
Oh my God, like second wives, like mistresses.
Bigamists, two families, yeah, that's all. It's crazy theater, people.
Dying in a fire.
It actually is like a Jackie Collins novel, now that I think about it.
So much sex, I mean, it's crazy, and it's all factual. So what, first of all, inspired you to write this particular story?
Well, the people in the story, principally Jerry Schoenfeld, who used to run the Shubert organization, very, very powerful man in the theater. He died in 2008. Was a good friend of mine. He was a great source of mine and taught me a lot about the theater business when I was really learning as a young columnist, young reporter. And I used to go to Jerry's office on Fridays, and he would let me sit in as long as I didn't write what I heard about. But he would say, and he would summon you, and he was the voice of God. Michael, come and watch how the magic is done. And I'd sit in this amazing office he had that had once been Lee Shubert, one of the founders of the Shubert Empire, his bedroom.
Oh, that's the bedroom.
That was the bedroom. And by the way, Jerry had it redone. It was very fancy, and it was very strange because he had the windows blocked up. So there's never any light in his office. But he had special lighting installed, so in the morning it was like the sun was rising, and in the evening the sun was setting. And I thought, if you just pull down the fucking drapes, you can see the real sun. But and also he had behind him, sat on this desk, and right behind him was Lee Shubert's actual bathroom, untouched since the 1920s. It had Italian pink marble, imported probably. It had what I used to call the Shubert power shower, because it had a shower with 8 nozzles.
Oh my God.
And it had a barber chair. And Jerry had told me that when Lee Shubert was running the Empire, he would have a shave every afternoon at 4:30, and then a girl at 5 o'clock. And he didn't have to leave his barber chair.
Yeah, I read that part.
They called them the 5 o'clock girls, because they would come up from whatever show. He plucked one out of the chorus, and they were told, you have to see Mr. Shubert at 5 o'clock. And he'd have the shave, and then he'd have something else, which did not require shaving cream.
No, dear.
But some sort of lubrication, I
And
think.
cut. It's family show. But so you were inspired to write because you knew so much about the show.
Well, Jerry would tell me stories, because Jerry had worked as a young man for J.J. Shubert, who was Lee's brother and the other founder of the Empire. And Jerry would regale me with stories of these guys. I mean, they were tyrants. They were brilliant, right? I mean, they created the theater as we know it. All the big Broadway theaters they built. The geography of Broadway today was put down by the Shubert brothers in the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s. And in the 1950s, young little Jerry Schoenfeld, junior little lawyer, went to work for JJ. And JJ said, you're going to need some help. Hire somebody else. And Jerry hired his best friend from the neighborhood they grew up on, the Upper West Side, a guy named Bernie Jacobs. And for years, they toiled in obscurity as the lawyers for JJ. And JJ was a tyrant. I mean, he would call Bernie in and he would say, Jacobs, your partner's Schoenfeld. He's an idiot. Fire him. Then he'd call Jerry and he'd say, Schoenfeld, your partner Jacobs, I hate him, fire him. And then Bernie and Jerry would have to meet each other for coffee and fire each other. But then the next day, JJ would have forgotten that he had fired them both. And they toiled in obscurity for a long time. And then JJ died. The company really fell apart in the 60s. It was being run by JJ's drunken nephew into the ground. And he ran it from the second floor bar at Sardi's. He had a phone installed by the bar, so he didn't have to be too far away from his bourbon. And he didn't care about the theater. He just wanted to collect rent. And the Shuberts ceased to become the powerful producing empire that they'd always been. And around this time, New York City is beginning to fall apart. Times Square is now becoming the Times Square of Midnight Cowboy. Pimps and prostitutes and drug peddlers, we know. The city is careening towards bankruptcy. And New York is a place that no tourist ever wants to set foot in. People are terrified of New York City. This is around the time when the mayor, Abe Beame, and the governor of New York, Hugh Carey, go to Gerald Ford and ask for a bailout. The city was bankrupt. They needed a bailout. And Jerry Ford turned them down. And the famous Daily News headline said, Ford to city, drop dead. That's how bad things were. But Bernie and Jerry staged a boardroom coup, pushed the family out, seized control of this tottering old empire for themselves, and as I try to show in my book, turned things around. And if it had not been for those two guys, those theaters today, I think, would have been torn down. They were not landmark back then. They were empty. They were dark. They had more value as parking lots. And as you know, in Follies, the Ziegfeld character says, and in a final burst of glory, this theater is to become a parking lot. Wow, that's how precarious the business was when those guys took it over. And my book is basically how they turned it around.
And this was when, the early 70s?
They took control in 1972, and they had a cash flow problem. I mean, it's inconceivable now. If the Shubert company is worth billions, you don't even know how much money it's worth, right? They had a cash flow problem in 1972. Bernie Jacobs, and I had this story, his wife Betty gave me an interview he did just for his family before he died, because I really didn't know him. He died before I was around. But he gave this kind of long, fascinating interview just for his kids, so that they would know what he had done. And she let me use it in the book.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that jumped out at me was the Shuberts had a cash flow problem in 1972. Bernie went to JPMorgan, who was their banker.
Wait, literally JPMorgan or the
Well,
bank?
the real JPMorgan had been the real Shubert Brothers banker. But by this time, JPMorgan is dead and so are the Shubert Brothers.
Okay.
But the bank is the Shubert Company's banker. Bernie asks for $1 million line of credit. And he uses as collateral the 17 Shubert theaters.
Whoa.
JPMorgan turns him down.
Oh my God.
Because in their estimation in 1972, 17 Broadway theaters in Times Square were not worth $1 million. Jump ahead. Today, the Shuberts are about to build a new musical theater next to the Imperial, 1,500-seat musical theater house. Just to build the theater. One theater, $300 million. That does not include the cost of the land because the Shuberts own the land. If you were to put a value of that parcel of land that they own during the build theater, that would probably be a $700-800 million theater for one theater. But in 1972, 17 theaters on Broadway weren't worth $1 million.
Wait, but what's so crazy is that not only were the theaters dark, I mean, just a couple years later they got a chorus line. How did they nab the longest running Broadway show?
Well, I mean, as I argue in the book, and I think it's quite true, and not only is a chorus line important in the history of Broadway, but I believe it's important in the revival of Times Square and ultimately New York City.
It represented New York in a sense.
Right. And what happened was, Bernie Jacobs he liked Michael Bennett. Michael Bennett was a young choreographer, and Bernie knew him when he was doing Coco with
Katharine Hepburn.
And Bernie met Michael at some event, and he asked Michael, he said, how do you handle Katharine Hepburn? And Michael said, it's easy. If I want her to go left, I tell her to go right. And Bernie thought, this is a smart guy. And he just took a liking to this guy. And they developed a father and son relationship that became very convoluted and fraught, as I show in the book, as they get more and more successful. But he just liked Michael Bennett. Michael was the son he probably wished he had. And Michael was always looking for a father figure. Because Michael's dad was a low-level Buffalo mobster who was always in hock to the mob. And Michael had left his family when he was 16 years old just to get away from that and make his career in New York. So he was looking for daddy, and Bernie was looking for a son. And they found each other. Michael does a chorus line for the Public Theater, for Joe Papp. who had listened to Michael's tape recordings of his friends, all those dancers, when they sat around, drank a lot of cheap white wine and red wine, and smoked a lot of pot. I've actually heard the tapes, and you can hear them getting progressively drunker and drunker
Oh,
on the tapes.
wow, that's so cool. You heard that?
Donna McKechnie, the ballet. I'm kidding, Donna. Kidding.
Dang it.
And Joe listened to these tapes, and he was like, he, like Bernie Jacobs, like David Merrick, like all these old great producers, these guys operated from the gut. He listened to 15 minutes of these drunken dancers talking about their lives, and he said to Michael, I'll give you some money and rehearsal space, go to work. Now remember, there's no book, right? Marvin Hamlish isn't even in the project yet.
Right.
Ed Cleven hasn't been hired to write the lyrics. There's nothing there but 15 minutes worth of interviews that Joe Papp listened to. Michael works on the show with Ed and Marvin for about a year, and then Joe Papp goes and said, I'm out of money. There's no show. Sorry, so long. So Michael Bennett, and I got this from Marvin Hamlish before Marvin died, Michael said to Marvin, we've got to go up to see Bernie Jacobs. We got to audition our show for him. Maybe the Shuberts will take it. So they're in the cab, and he says to Marvin, he says, don't play any of the sad songs. Bernie doesn't like sad songs. Play the tits and ass thing. So they get up to the Shubert offices, which, by the way, are not glamorous at this point because it is 1974, and the company is still in peril. And Marvin said to me, there was this old piano that had not been played since Sigmund Romberg was the in-house composer for the Schubert brothers. He said, I lifted the lid, these cracked ivory keys, and he hit the first note to tits and ass, and the leg fell out from under the,
That's
the piano. And then it was like, and Phil Smith, who is now today the chairman of the board of the Schubert organization, was there. And he remembers scrambling with Michael and Bernie to hold up the piano while Marvin Hamlish played the score to a chorus line.
Just for the story.
And keep going.
Oh.
And I like that. And when they were finished, Michael said, you can have the show. And Bernie Jacobs, who was very wise, he said, I can't do that to Joe Papp. I can't steal something from a rival. And Michael was crushed. He thought, well, then he said to Bernie, he said, my show's going to die. He said, no, you don't understand. I'm not going to take the show from Joe, but we'll lend him some money, and he can finish it down there, and then we'll see what it is. Well, they moved that show to the Shubert organization. Yeah. Phil Smith told me, Michael, we hoped it would run 4 or 5 years. Wow. It ran 15 years. Yeah. And as Phil says, before a chorus line, there was no money. After a chorus line, there was nothing but money. And that really began the revival, first of the Shubert organization, then of Broadway, and then in the end of Times Square in New York as we know it today.
But I love it. It's all based on talent and all based on gut feelings. Like, not like, we'll turn this movie into a musical and then we'll make money. It was so Broadway.
Every single show that I write about in my book that had an impact, really financially from the business perspective, because that's what I write about. You know, I'm not doing a critical assessment of these shows. I'm trying to look at the shows that really saved the business. Every single one of those shows, if somebody had brought the idea to you, you would have said, this is insane. Mm-hmm. If somebody had said to you, there's this little book of poems for children about cats by T.S. Eliot. We're going to make it into a musical. Now, Andrew Lloyd Webber could not raise the money for Cats. He mortgaged his house. His daughter, Imogen, who's a friend of mine, remembers as a little kid sitting around the kitchen table and Andrew telling the family that he was going to mortgage the house because he believed in the show. Cameron McIntosh, who was the producer of Cats, Cameron had an investor who had been with him many, many years in every loser show that Cameron had done up to Cats, a guy named David Dean. And we went to David and he said, I'm going to do the show with Andrew Lloyd Webber about cats. And David Dean said, Cameron, I love you, but England, we're a nation of dog lovers. Yeah. He didn't invest. He invested in every loser Cameron did, but he missed out on cats. If somebody had said to you, I'm going to take a 1,000-page 19th century French novel about a guy who steals bread and turn it into a musical, are you going to give your money for Les Miserables?
No, it's true. I mean, that's why I get mad when people say to me, why would they turn blah, blah, blah into a musical? And I'm like, you can turn anything into a musical if you do a good job. There's no idea that's stupid, but you've got to do a good job. And these producers put their money into these surefire things that are never surefire.
They've got it all wrong, because what I learned in thinking about Bernie Jacobs and writing about Bernie Jacobs, and remember, he and Jerry really, they were the most powerful men in the American theater, in the world theater, really. They ran it all at their height. But Bernie bet on the jockeys, meaning he bet on the Michael Bennetts, and the Bob Fosse's and the Cameron McIntoshes and the Andrew Lloyd Webbers, because they were to create the shows that he couldn't possibly think of or imagine. But he backed them. He met Cameron McIntosh when Cameron was a kid with no money, first came to New York on some cheap ticket that he got, was introduced to Bernie, who took him out to lunch, and Bernie said, "Where are you staying?" He was staying in some hotel. He said, "Well, you stay with me and Betty." And they had a nice townhouse then. And Cameron McIntosh, as a struggling young producer, would sleep in Bernie and Betty's guest room in their townhouse. And as Cameron said to me, there was nothing there but the promise maybe of one day a career. But Bernie saw in Cameron McIntosh someone who was passionate and devoted to the business, and he was going to help them. And that relationship led to Cats and Phantom and Les Mis and Miss Saigon, all shows that the Shuberts had a big investment in and had in their theaters.
Those are all Schubert shows. Man, they must have a lot of money now. That's
Yeah, the piano leg doesn't fall down anymore when you play tits and ass on the keys.
collapse. So let me ask you: do you feel, by the way, this book called Razzle Dazzle we're just talking about? Do you feel like, oh my God, I'm out? Like I've told every single story I have? I mean, I feel like this is so comprehensive. This book. Do you have another one in mind?
You know, I would like to do another book. This was my first book, and it was I love doing it. It made me a better writer, I think. It actually made me a better writer because some of you may know I write a slightly snarky column for the New York Post.
Very popular.
But, you know, I realized the sarcastic attitude I take in the column is fine for about 700 words, but would become incredibly tedious over 400 pages. So when I was assembling this book, when I was doing the reporting and interviewing lots of people, I thought, you know, I just have to get out of the way. They lived it. It was their struggle, not mine. Their battles, not mine. And because they're theater people, they are inherently theatrical. So they tell great stories. So I really just took the Michael Riedel snarky voice of the Post, put that aside, and let all of these people I'd interviewed really tell their story. And it was just the way I arranged it. So it was a really exciting time for me just as a writer. I would do another book, but I'm not going to write a book. My book stops really when Disney arrives on the scene with Beauty and the Beast in the 90s, because that's around the time Bernie Jacobs dies, and the Shuberts are sort of beginning to take a back seat to other companies like Disney and Clear Channel and all these other people who've come along. You could probably write a book about Broadway since Disney, but it's going to be a book about how rich everybody got. And I remember interviewing the wonderful director Michael Blakemore, who wrote a brilliant, brilliant book called Arguments with England. And it's about his struggle to make it in the theater in London in the 50s and 60s. And it ends when he directs his first hit play, A Day in the Death of Joe Egg. And I love this book. And I said, are you going to write a sequel? He said, no. He said, to me, it's the struggle to get there that's interesting. After that, then I bought this house. I made this deal. I got this car. I made this amount of money. I mean, what am I going to write in the second half? Weekend grosses $1.5 million, week in and week out. I was interested at a time when Broadway almost fell apart, and how it was saved, and who saved it.
It is fascinating. I have two more things I want to talk about with you. So, like I said, the book's called Razzle Dazzle. Talk to everyone about ICE, and is that even still happening now? Like, it's very interesting. Has it stopped? What is it? Tell everybody.
Well, my book,
ISIS.
Yeah,
ICE.
right. My book begins with a big corruption story that gripped the theater in the early 60s, and it was about ICE. What ICE is basically, and this is how it worked back then. If you have, let's say, tickets to My Fair Lady, the hottest show in the world, the face value of that ticket in 1962 was, let's say for the sake of argument, $10. There are 1,500 seats in the theater. There are a lot more than 1,500 people who want to see that show because it's the hottest show in the world. And they're going to pay the brokers and the scalpers a lot more than $10. Now, how do the brokers and the scalpers get their hands on those tickets? There are people in the theater world who sell those tickets to them and pocket the bribe, which is cash, which is ICE, because it's untraceable and it melts away. Wow. So that $10 ticket on the street was worth $100. So there's $90 per ticket. 8 performances a week in 1962. That is untraceable. And I interviewed a guy who was an assistant attorney general who broke open the story back then. And he estimated in 1962, the amount of ice melting around Times Square was about $75 million. That's like, what, $600 million.
Imagine.
No taxman ever saw it. And the Shubert organization was steeped in it. They were running an ice room out of the Sardi building in room 504. They were taking their own tickets and selling them to the brokers.
Oh.
And this attorney general, assistant attorney general, went to his boss, Louis Lefkowitz, who was the famous New York State attorney general, and said, look, I could prosecute them all. I could put them all in jail. I could put every Shubert in jail. I could put every David Merrick in jail. They're all doing it. And Louis Lefkowitz said Broadway is too important in New York City to bring it down. So they held public hearings. It's on the front page of the New York Times, New York Post, for 3 days. And they were just putting the people on warning. Stop it. One guy went to jail. His name was Murray Helwitz.
He took the fall for everybody.
He took the fall for the entire industry. He was a cousin of the Shubert brothers. He was in jail 9 months, got out of jail, he went back to work in a box office of a Shubert theater, because that's how business was done then. So my point of that story is I just wanted to show people how seedy and corrupt the theater business was back then. Because now we think of Broadway as a multi-billion-dollar global business that's run by corporations like Disney and Universal and Warner Brothers. I mean, all the big studios are Sony. They're all desperate to do Broadway shows. So the ice is still there. It's been cut into by the loathsome premium price tickets.
I was going to ask what you thought about those.
Well, the
premium price
producers
tickets.
basically said, look, these scalpers are making a lot of money off our shows, so why don't we just do it ourselves? And you know what they discovered? And we were all up in arms about it. I mean, come on, what are you going to see Hamilton for $450, $500 a ticket?
People are.
Scalpers, $1,900.
Oh.
So they tried to cut in the ice that way. But the fact of the matter is, if a show is as hot as Hamilton, in a city that attracts the richest people in the world, if a rich Russian wants to see a show, he will pay any price. And as long as there's someone willing to pay any price, someone is going to be pocketing some money somewhere down the line. I mean, I think it's terrible. I remember being able to go to shows when I came here to go to college in the 80s at the TKTS booth. You get the half price, $25, $30.
Yeah.
What's the half price ticket now? $75, $90, something like that? But you know, I mean, listen, producers are not, you know, they're not non-profit people. They're capitalists. They're in it to make money. And as many of them have said to me, Michael, as long as people are willing to pay these prices, we're going to charge those prices.
But how does the younger generation become obsessed with theater if the tickets are unaffordable? That's the problem that we're going to
They
run
listen
out of
to
fans.
Seth Rudetsky on SiriusXM.
Well, that's very sweet. Thank you. But still,
I worry about that too. I do worry about that. I mean, you know, they're just breeding a whole generation of kids who are of the 1%, just rich kids who can go to Broadway. I mean, Broadway, like New York, has really become Beverly Hills. If you can't afford to live here, you can't go to Hoboken now. It's expensive there.
no.
But you know what it does? It will, I think, ultimately take a toll on this city as a cultural center. Because one of the things I also realized in writing this book, when I'm writing about people like Michael Bennett and Tommy Tune, who had no money when they come to the city's kid, but they're living for nothing. You know, Tommy Tune never had any money. Michael Bennett never had any money when they were young, but they lived for a few $100s a month.
And they saw shows?
And they saw shows together, but the thing is that they all lived with each other. So it was this creative energy going on. And I talked to, you know, my friend Twyla Tharp talks about being in New York in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, you lived in buildings with Basquiat. Before he was Basquiat, lived down the hall. You lived next door to painters and poets and sculptors and playwrights. And you'd feed and draw on all that creative energy. But you cannot have that kind of energy among young creative people if it costs them $3,500 a month to rent a studio in Manhattan. And we forget, too, another thing I think so important in making Manhattan a center of culture all these years is it is an island where people live close together. You know, they're not spread out. You live in the village on top of everybody. Back in the 50s and the 60s, they lived in cheap walk-up apartments. They hung out at coffee shops. They smoked pot. They did all that stuff. And they came up with these brilliant ideas. You remove that environment, that community, you're left, I mean, I live in the West Village now. Thank God I bought my apartment 20 years ago. You know, and you're left with hedge fund managers. And no hedge fund manager is ever going to write a chorus line.
No, dear. No, I know. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. I feel like we were the last generation to be that creative generation that moved here and kind of all smushed together. I don't know where it's going. You went to Columbia, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you're such a good speaker. Were you on the debate team when you were in high school?
No, but I was on the radio.
You what? You
I had
had
a
my
radio.
gig? Oh,
I had a radio show on WKCR, I think it was called.
And my final thing is, I feel like I'm the only person reading your book you like the most. Perfect Show's My Fair Lady. I just don't understand. Am I supposed to be rooting for her to be with Henry Higgins? Isn't he an old man? Like, why is that perfect? Is the ending happy?
I like that show not so much because I don't see it as being about her. In fact, I think Eliza Doolittle is a bit of a cipher. I think it's about him. And what moves me about that show is here's a man who has done everything he can in his life to keep love out. And at the very end of the show, when she's leaving, he realizes he's in love. And that last moment on the great Cast album with Rex Harrison, when he says, damn, 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 pause, I've grown accustomed to her face. And then the orchestra goes, da-da-da-dee, da-dee-da-da. And there's a man who's fallen in love for the first time. I think it's very touching.
Okay, I like that analysis. I just don't like the whole Catherine Zeta-Jones, the whole age difference thing makes me crazy. But I buy that. So bravo. In conclusion, Razzle Dazzle. Is there an audiobook?
There is an audiobook, yes.
Who's reading? Angelica Houston. Who's reading it?
Well, frankly, I wanted Frank Langella, but he comes with a price tag, so
Forget it.
It's a fine guy I've never heard of before, but I think he gets paid 10 cents a word.
It's all
10 cents a day.
words.
10 cents
And
a
you
word.
and you have an audio. I mean, what's it called?
A Kindle?
Kindle version.
There's a Kindle version.
Okay, I totally approve of it. It's a great holiday gift.
But there's nothing like holding that old Razzle Dazzle hardcover book in your hand.
I agree, and you know how much is left. I love it. I'm in the middle of it.
I hold it every night before I go to bed.
It's a little inappropriate. All right, thank you, Michael Riedel. Bravo.
Thank you very much.